Hi, all. Thank you for coming and listening to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where we put a light on all the taqiyya and misinformation that's out there. This show exists com- to combat a war. We are combating. We are combating some incredible battles um, inside America, inside Canada, and North America. It's an incredible battle, and part of this is all because of this one paragraph that we now know about this war. This one paragraph in the explanatory memorandum that was used in 2007 as evidence in the United States versus the Holy Land Foundation trial. That one paragraph says this: the process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all that the word means. The Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands in the hands of the believers, so that all other religions, sorry, um, so victorious over all the religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to the challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. And there is no escape from that destiny except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? So this show exists to really show you what's happening in America and abroad with the mass Muslim migration to Europe and other things that are happening. And tonight we have an incredible guest. We have Dr. Jiri Valenta. Now, Dr. Jiri Valenta presently serves as the president of the Institute of Post-Communist Studies and Terrorism in Miami, Florida. He is an internationally recognized expert on decision-making theory, Russian interventions in Europe and the Middle East, U.S. national security, post-communism, special emphasis on the Ukraine, and Islamic terrorism. By virtue of his decade-long stint in the U.S. Department of the Navy and his research on 5 continents, supported by several distinguished fellowships, he has also excelled in studies of Russian military strategy, conflict resolution, and Russia's use of surprise and deception. He has also been a consultant to the Reagan and Bush 42 administration, as well as to Czech Republic's Václav Havel. The Valenta Small Institute is the only one in the world, as far as we know, that deals with 2 key issues facing President-elect Donald Trump: joint cooperation with Russia in the struggle against Islamic terrorism, and conflict resolution of Russo-Ukrainian relations. Finally, he has both lectured and written about international terrorism as a threat to both the United States and Russia. His interest in Islamic terrorism harks back to a seminar he organized with Norman Podhoretz in Miami, 1986. I'm sure I'm going to hear about how I slaughtered some of these names in a few minutes. With a quarter of a century of experience as a university professor and with decades of research, he possesses an exceptional quality. He is strictly bipartisan. It's suggested by the motto of this institute: unafraid, bipartisan, uphold U.S. and freedom. And with that, thank you, Dr. Jiri, for coming to join us.
You're welcome. You forgot to mention, of course, the most important factor in my research. I am blessed having a lovely wife from Brooklyn who is also very educated and equal partner in writing. And her name is Lenny Friedman Valenta. We've been married almost 20 years, and we've done together, travel research, lecturing in various parts of the world on the issue related to those 2 subjects, which I think are the most important for Trump. No matter what you think about him, he's facing it. It's the Islamist, jihadist onslaught on the West. You are covering yourself so well in your program. I listen to it very regularly. And then the unfortunate situation, Russian interventions in Ukraine, Georgia, and there seem to be now some pressure on the neighboring Belarus. We don't pay too much attention to it. So we have these two subjects which are of crucial importance, and Lenny and I try to make sense of it by writing books, articles, and lecturing about it. We really both of us are former Democrats, and we stay really strictly bipartisan, because the mistake in our policy making towards both issues, the Russian interventionism as well as the Islamism, has been happening by both parties, and I can give you some examples of it. But we really have leaders. Trump is right about it, who have not understand the challenges, who were not educated in geopolitics and history. That goes well for Bush, but also Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And Trump himself has to do a lot of homework. We've been supporting him, but we are very critical of him, because even today he said something which I thought was not superbly founded on the documents. He tend to exaggerate, and he should study more history. But I think basically, in his heart, he wants to protect this country from Islamism. That's why we support him.
I find one of the reasons I did want to have you on originally was because you have this unique perspective and insight that most people don't. One of those things is we're talking about Russia, and Trump's, when he ran on a platform, he was thinking, if we could partner with Russia, we could really, knock this thing called radical Islam out of the park. And I was wondering if you could comment on that so far, how that seems to be going so far.
That's a very good question. I prepare for you just in a new article we are writing, be publishing in a few days. We start with Winston Churchill, our favorite man, with his explanation why he worked with Stalin against Hitler. So let me give you the quote. If Hitler invaded hell, I would make at least a favorable reference to the devil in the House of Commons. Now, this was the allusion to Hitler's having invaded Russia. Churchill, having often spoken vociferously against the Soviet regime over the years, was now prepared to help Russia. And I think we have a similar situation. I do believe that the Islamist challenge is very powerful and is damaging to both Russia and America. And on this particular issue, we can, in a limited way, limited partnership, cooperate. And we did, actually. I'm very critical of George W. Bush, but he was the first one who, in 2001, 2002, initiated that alliance against Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Imagine the Russian generals were briefing our generals why they lost the war in Afghanistan. There was a minute of silence in Moscow. Vlad, the KGB man, evoked God because he knew, of course, he would please George Bush. But I also think that his conversion to some sort of Christianity of Russian kind was genuine. And let's hope that we can do it with Russians. But there got to be a solution to Ukrainian crisis. He cannot be killing the Ukrainians while we are declaring him as an ally. So this is a very complex problem. Hopefully, he will be able to handle it. He knows more real estate and foreign policy, so we should help him, all of us.
I'm kind of amazed. I'm still waiting to see what will happen. I mean, he's only been in office a few weeks, and we still just have to. It's a waiting game for everybody. It's a waiting game, and that is the.
Well, it's
sad,
a very
unfortunate
thing. I'm sure Paul, you also recognize this. Our country is more divided than ever since World War II. Actually, I would say since Civil War. We have something unprecedented that happened since George Washington became the first president. We have the confirmation of the basic leaders of his administration, which now going on for a third week. Just tonight, as we are speaking, as you know, session will be hopefully confirmed. And that's what the Republicans did not do to Democrats. And I think this division has been exploited by our enemies, by our adversaries abroad. You saw the Russian onslaught in Ukraine last several days. You have the struggle in Yemen and Afghanistan. Yesterday, just another explosion, 20 people killed. We just have to be united, like we were under FDR, against this fascist or neo-fascist threat of Islamist terrorism, which is sooner or later going to affect even strongly our homeland. I fear the nuclear devices even being brought by those terrorists in the future. And thus the building of the wall and some of these measures are necessary. But of course, I'm sure the listeners would agree that Donald is making terrible mistakes sometimes in his public pronouncements, and he is not an expert on politics. He's a real estate builder, and we are facing difficult times.
I'm willing to say when he comes off as a politician, he doesn't do well so far. He has to learn some of the game, I guess is what I would say. He has to learn how to do things, and I can understand that to an extent. The part of the problem is when you get the oath of office as president, they kind of want you to come off. They want you to start off as polished, and that is a struggle no matter who you are.
That's what was the strength. Actually, it's a tragedy. Barack Obama, I welcomed him at the beginning. I had a great hope for him. My wife did as well. We talked to his advisor, who is now dead, a great Democrat you would recognize, who convinced us to support him in 2008. But then we were very disappointed. Became very naive, leftish. He didn't tell us about his Muslim background. He didn't tell us about some of the leftish priests who support him in Chicago. And frankly, he meant well, but he was very naive. Yet he was extremely popular because he was, as you said yourself, he was very polished lawyer. And, Trump a little bit reminds me of another great builder, Russian leader Yeltsin, who I knew very well, because he's very unpolished and doesn't follow the rules, undisciplined. But I think he tries. So at this time, we should all help us. But we also divided yesterday for the first time in the Senate. We have this Rule 9 invoked. If you must have noticed it. Senator Warren from Massachusetts was asked to stop talking and bad-mouthing Session. I don't want to go into details, but this is a very unprecedented thing. The Congress is so divided. I've never seen it before. I'm sure you would agree with me, and that's where it's our weakness.
Yeah, I think that the interesting part here is, I think as you originally stated, our enemies are taking advantage of this. And we can see this in recent history. The airport protests were actually coordinated, admittedly, by CARE, which is Hamas in America. And
yes, there was some involvement indeed. Of course, many young American kids, I know them. I used to teach them. They are not well prepared for the war affairs. We don't have sophisticated study of geography. In fact, we don't have it almost at all in most of the schools. We don't have historical courses. We have a lot of people on both extremes teaching our young kids. The education is the problem, and also knowing the map. I recall that we were concerned with Nicaragua 20, 30 years ago, and when I lectured on that, there was a Russian intervention and civil war. I recall that people thought that Nicaragua borders on Mexico, and it's in Central America. So there are some basic problems with our education. That's a major handicap, and then of course the division is a tremendously harmful thing. Hopefully, we will overcome it.
So one of the things you do a lot of writing, and I just should tell everybody we met through LinkedIn, and I have to say, people, if you get a chance to get into LinkedIn, you can meet some amazing people, and I'm enjoying my experience with LinkedIn because of this. and Dr. Valenta has shared some of his articles on LinkedIn, on referenced out there. One of them, he wrote about President Trump's executive order placing the temporary ban on 7 countries. We had on the show, on Gotti Edelman's show, actually last week, we had Dr. William Bradford, and he talked about how the rollout was kind of, the idea was right, but the rollout he felt was kind of rough. And
we have to be critical. Of course, it was, we were saved by the new general who's running the Homeland Security, Secretary, what's his name? Kelly. This gentlemanly old soldier took the guilt responsible on himself. He said, "This is on me." Well, of course it was on the White House, but then if you look at it objectively, can you blame them? At that point, they had only 2 generals approved. Now, this is a 3rd week, and again, first time since George Washington, we have only 4 or 5 cabinet members approved. You cannot have a continuity, you cannot have management, first-class management, if you don't have the people and your team in place. There are people who are leaking. There are people who hate the fact that Hillary didn't win. Not everybody is bipartisan like you and I, and therefore we have these problems. But I agree with this critique. This was not well done. I would have waited. He could have waited on that 2-3 weeks after. But the orders were issued as the DHL secretary was on her way from his bedroom to his office. He was just going to the first day to the job. So both parties can be blamed for it, and maybe we could slow it down. Many things he's doing, I believe, are in our national interest. But I am concerned about the management like you are.
One of the things I think we very much agree on is that one of the countries that should have been on the ban was Saudi Arabia. Would you like to elaborate on your reasoning for that?
Yes. Of course, today the Homeland Chief General spoke about it, and he felt that if we put Saudi Arabia on it, we will lose a lot of supporters we have within the establishments. We put the nations which are on it are by coincidence really Muslim. They are the failed nations, and we, frankly, I'm being very critical of both parties, contributed to the chaos and rise of Islamists in Libya, Iraq, and Syria because we were supporting wrong guys. We thought these were rebels fighting for the Arab Spring. Now, what happened is, they became jihadists. They started to cut the heads and displaying the love for extremist interpretation of Quran and attacking targets in Europe. Europeans understand it much more because there are dozens of German women who've been raped last several months by various immigrants from Middle East countries. I want to say Middle East countries because not everybody is Muslim who comes from there. And Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, in the past, many of the terrorists came from Saudi Arabia. I believe the majority of the attackers on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. They have the Wahhabist schools which preach radical Islam. It's a long story, and I'll give you some name of somebody in Europe who is the expert on Quran, and he's considered extremist, but I think his observation about what is happening in Germany, the influence of Saudi's ideology on some of these, or many of these refugees who are coming supposedly to find political refuge, but to agitate for Quran, is serious, and they live in a different life than we do. I mean, women don't mean anything. They're slaves, right? The homosexuals have to be killed. They throw them out from the high-rise buildings. They kill the people who are like the German Nazis, who are infected or ill with mental illnesses, etc., etc. We are dealing with a new challenge, which the Islamofascist kind, which was really generated by Islamist Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. So on one hand, we have the establishment and military police and royal families which are pro-Western, primarily for economic reasons. But we have, the masses and you might say the most Islamist ideologues who are running those schools and poisoning mind of young Saudis, and so putting them on that list would have been a rather difficult thing to do. Yet we have to cope with this. This cannot go forever. We have to really bring it to them and home and ask them to do something about the growth of Wahhabist schooling and education of young people, many of them who are terrorists. It's a very, very dangerous world. But I would have not brought Saudi Arabia at this time on the list. I would give them more time to straighten their home, and give them ultimatum as to where their education is going. The youth are being poisoned, and they might have been poisoned by ideas of the extreme interpretation of Quran. And you have two different interpretations of Quran. So you have the beautiful side. There are some parts of Quran which can be interpreted like that, and there are the more moderate Muslims, surely in Indonesia, parts of India, Southeast Asia, who are not behaving the way as the Middle East Muslims in those nations which were put on a list. And they are not anti-American. Many friends we have in, for example, Indonesia, which I know very well. But Saudi Arabia is a sort of mixed bag, and it is a problem.
It's interesting you mentioned Indonesia. I remember the Spice Island slaughters not that long ago, and I believe Bin Laden actually paid for the majority of that. They were jumping out of
he's
helicopters.
The best example of the Saudis family. But one has to recall, and there are superficial news in our media, as you know. Trump might be partly right about it. The family of Bin Laden actually came from Yemen, where now it's a big struggle. We have a raid there. South Yemen, where you have the Houthis, the Shiites, who are being supported by Iran, also radical Islamists killing the pro-Sunni, if you will, pro-Saudis Muslims. So there's a division also. And unfortunately, we have began this. We began this unfortunate rift. We launched with our Iraq war. We brought the division between Shiites and Sunnis in Iraq and the whole region. And that's something we are responsible, surely, the W. And Condi Rice, who, have maintained her likability, but who with our President W. Bush was primarily responsible for this very naive approach that we will bring democracy into this semi-feudal society where the divisions between Sunni and Shiites were just waiting to be open and rifted. And, then it spread out in the whole region. As you know, the ISIS growth, which went to Syria from Iraq, and now they are in Libya. You have them also in Arabian Peninsula. It's a really regional problem, and I hate to say it. Unfortunately, we caused that with our silly interventions.
I think I'm kind of laughing. We mentioned some of the things you said. It just strikes home, partly because you love history, and I mean everything that you write displays your love of history. I know that I'm a social studies teacher, so this is the kind of I teach in a high school. I work with kids, trying to get them on track.
That's
and
an important
I know that,
job, incidentally. I would not put it down. That's where our students should get the basics. History. Winston Churchill used to say, "Study history, young man. Study history," and it's true. We don't have. Imagine. Forgive me, I'm interrupting, but it just dawned on me. I recall that W. Bush asked during the presidential campaign 2000, Paul Wolfowitz, chairman of his foreign policy group, is German a member of NATO? This is a future president who doesn't have a basic understanding of our allies. The education of our leaders, and of course, Obama displays similar lack of education. He was a lawyer, Polish, very good at the night shows, but he really had a naive imagination that, this Middle East Spring will be, or Arab Spring, if they call it, would lead to enlightenment and democracy in the region. Unfortunately, we ended up from Arab Spring to Islamist winter, and that's a tragedy.
I think it's the one thing that I've said for a long time is you have to be historically stupid to think that Islam and democracy can coexist because they hate each other. It's
unfortunately, it's like the Protestants and Catholics. If I take a really objective historical view, our Western civilization went through it too. In 16th, 17th century, or 15th to 17th century, we have a tremendous. Our own Shiites were the Protestants, and Sunnis were the Catholics. Were killing each other in millions. 30 Years' War, which was caused by religious reasons, above all. There was about 25 million people who died. We went through this too, but they have their own religious wars now, Shiites and Sunnis. And we are unfortunately caught in it, but we did not have to have it of this magnitude if we had stayed away from intervention in Iraq and Libya and Syria. And here, not only W and Condi, but also Hillary Clinton is the major culprit. Who? I remember there was an interview with you were watching Super Bowl, didn't you, on a Sunday?
I didn't watch the Super Bowl.
You don't know.
I'm not a football fan. But my son's team won.
I was not born
happy.
in this country, but I've been here 40 years, so I watch every Super Bowl. And you have Riley of Fox News interviewing President. And that interview was extremely interesting because, in his own way, he was telling the truth, President. He said that when he was asked about Putin, he's a killer. He said, yeah, maybe he's a killer, but he's like in Russia, which is also true. And we have also killers. Well, I'm thinking about Hillary Clinton, and that's why I did not want to vote for her. When the news came that Gaddafi was killed, they were showing the film, he was being bayoneted, sodomized. The blood was coming from his mouth and ears, and from other parts of the body. We don't want to go into it. She was watching the television. She was jubilant. She said, we came, we saw, and we killed him. Because she was getting a lot of those, financial support for her election campaign through the Clinton Foundation. And in her book, she lies in her memoirs that it was because of the human rights. We care about all these people, some ridiculous comments that, do you know that we were even distributing for a few days, what was it, Lenny? We were distributing the, what is that medicine? Viagra. Viagra was distributed on the battlefields.
What?
We were told that Viagra was distributed by Gaddafi for his soldiers, that they can rape more black Africans, and that's why we have to intervene. A ridiculous thing. I can write you about it. It will be in our book.
Wow.
So the problem is that we should have stayed away from these three wars. Bush did very well in Afghanistan, worked with the Russians, The Russians were supporting us. They even sent generals who lost the war in Afghanistan to brief our generals. And, Putin is a religious believer, Orthodox religious believer. He's authoritarian. He probably killed all these people, but only limited numbers of those who are disagreeing with his policies. We worked with Stalin during the World War II. I read you the quote from Churchill, who killed millions of people, nations. He exterminated whole nations, so resettled them in Central Asia like Chechens and so forth. So if we could have worked with such a war criminal, we can work even with Putin, because we both are facing the Islamist threat. They in North Caucasus and we are going to face it sooner or later, coming from the south, but also from the north. Nobody talks about Canada. We have open borders there as well.
I actually discussed that. One of the guys that I have gotten my knowledge from describes Canada as a beachhead that we must address, because that is where the Muslim Brotherhood tends to come through. They go to Canada, get their citizenship in 3 years, then move to
Absolutely.
America.
We had this threat at the beginning of the century, which was prevented by some of the good people who used to work for Bill Clinton. And they were going to attack the United States then in 2000, on December 31st. But it was prevented at the last minute. Now, the problem in Canada also is that in the past we had a government which was more closer to us, but now we have again Trudeau Jr., like father, anti-American, liberal-minded friend of Barack Obama, who means well like Barack, but it's not security-oriented, and we cannot expect too much help from him as far as the control of our borders with Canada are concerned. Fortunately, most of the parts, if you I used to live in Minnesota. These are very, very hard penetrated borders, as you know. It's extremely difficult in some of the parts of those borders to cross by without being unnoticed and so forth. Nevertheless, one of these days we would have to address that issue as well. And if they cannot find a way through the south after the wall is built there in 2 years, so that's a real thing now. It will happen in the north.
I live actually right on the border here. I'm right on Lake Ontario in New York State. So, and we have a Border Patrol station near us with some excellent young men working there. And, I've talked to them about, how many do we get coming over, the OT, you heard of OTM for other than Mexican.
Yes.
We have up here OTC other than Canadian. And I actually put a FOIA request in and received it. And it was interesting to see who was coming over besides Canadians. And what killed me was the number of people from primarily Muslim-dominant countries and Asians. It was a combination of those two that were coming over. And those are just the people that are getting caught. I talked to a gentleman who was a Border Patrol agent, and he considered this border more porous than the border down south.
That's
and it was interesting. I'm not saying that it's more dangerous, but more porous. And
more
it's
porous,
because
that's maybe the best way to put it.
Yeah.
You're right.
It's a very, very
But in the past, we were very close to Canada. Our defense establishments, our intelligence organizations, and so forth. Now they are evolving in more anti-American way. They no longer fought with us in Iraq and
I would go so far
Syria
as to say
war
they're becoming Islamists. They're starting to legislate put into law Islamophobia laws. So I have
that's a
direction.
basic problem. My wife talks about as a woman who understands it, and former official of the Democratic Party. You simply, if you start with allowing Sharia to become our law, which will supersede our American law, you are really destroying America. And we see it in England. If you watch the British Parliament in session, there are already Muslim deputies who are fighting and hating now Trump and creating this ugly atmosphere. He cannot go to England. I don't know if you know. He cannot lecture there. Parliament forbade him to come, or tries to spoil his visit, which is planned for late this year. And the same thing in Canada. These were our allies, and now, unfortunately, Trump, with the way how he talked to the Australian Prime Minister, did not inspire too much confidence. That's another friend which we have. Now, they imposed on us 1,200 Syrian immigrants. That was agreed by Obama, which was one of those silly things he did. I cannot get mad at him because he's such a likable guy. But he has been very lax with the Islamist terrorists. He would not even say that word, Islamic radical terrorism. He had almost sabotaged some of our programs, protecting the borders and trying to get refugees.
The entire Countering Violent Extremism program actually promoted violent extremism. I mean, that's heavily documented, where they spent money to promote people to go to listen to Wahhabists. They paid for Muslim Brotherhood members to go overseas and listen to get taught by Wahhabists and things like that. Department of Homeland Security paying for these things. Isn't that nice to know? And that's, if anybody wants to go find that stuff, you can go to usaspending.gov and you can type in some.
This is available literature. We almost lost Egypt to the Muslim brothers, and there's enough evidence that Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Obama had close ties with the leading extremists of the Muslim brothers who took over Egypt, and they did it in a free election, so we didn't understand. Even some of our senators, were confused. Well, why should we go after them? Well, remember, even Adolf Hitler the German dictator, came to power by free election.
Democracy. Yeah, he came through with democracy.
That's a very extremely. So sometimes democracy has to be protected by undemocratic steps, and Abraham Lincoln would be the first to admit it. He had to revoke habeas corpus and put the country on war footing and to preserve the union.
So here's another thing. I want to get back to your love of history. Your love of history, it's incredible. And you pull out one thing I never caught. You even talk about a ban that FDR put in place on immigration. Could you talk about that?
Yes, well, FDR is my favorite president. If he did not send the GIs to Operation Overlord, which was supervised so brilliantly by General Eisenhower, I would have not been alive. But my mother was from a mixed Jewish family, and my father was Czech, and they could not get married. And she got fortunately pregnant around the D-Day, and I was born on April 9. So they could not take us to the concentration camp as they took some of the other relatives. So for me, this is a real thing. Writing memoirs with my wife, and some of her relatives, distant relatives, also died in the Holocaust. So if you recall these things, you know what is the next. First are the Jews, then are the Democrats, then are the priests, then are the homosexuals, LGBT community. These idiots always try to kill, and we will have the kind of semi-Nazi regime which we had before during the World War II if we allow it. And our people tend to be very naive. They don't see the threat. Millions of people in streets protesting against Trump, not realizing that he really, in his own not well sophisticated way, he's trying to preserve the security of our nations. With our borders, we cease to be a nation. You can just cross the country. That's unthinkable in Europe or most of the parts of the world. You ask any Chinese or Russian if they can just cross the border, so refugees can just go back and forth. And we still have it, as you know. So the democracy has to protect itself, and it is upon the educators like yourself that you explain it to young people. Well, what do your students say when you talk to them about Trump and terrorism and Islamism? Do they understand?
I am actually forbidden from doing that.
You cannot even talk about it.
I can't, because we're not technically, teachers are not allowed to talk about religion, and that's part of what I'm.
But it's not just religion. You see, to me, the Islamists are not religions. That's a really sect.
And what you're saying, right? What you're saying is
there
right.
are really a sect within the Muslim religion which adopted the Nazi ideology, racist ideology, against the Jews and other minorities.
I want Islam
FDR, you asked me about FDR, he understood it. Yeah. He even took some illegal actions, as I wrote in this interview which you saw, article, to protect the United States against Japanese and Nazi agents. He was thinking, our U.S. Navy got orders to sink the Nazi submarines in the Caribbean in 1940. If Congress found out, he would have been impeached. We were not in a state of war. FBI went after the German agents. I've done research on it with my wife, Lenny. Even in Caribbean, Central Asia, Central America, the German Nazis were put in a jail in those countries because they were coming here. And when they, some of them landed in New Jersey, they were found guilty by the military court and hanged. This is how FDR dealt with that threat. And I'm just afraid, we might come to it that Trump will do things which would be necessary to protect our homeland. And learn from FDR, how to deal with this threat. Most of the American people are on it. But I am shocked that you cannot say anything about the current affairs with when you talk to your students. How do you educate them?
Well, right now I have it's a really good question. The big thing that we need to I'm working on changing education because currently textbooks are full of misinformation, and we need to teach Islam as a political entity, not just as a religion. And when we start to teach Islam as a political entity or political theory, we can then teach about Sharia and what it really teaches, what it really wants, and the true history.
You might be a little too hardline, but there is a German, Czech Jewish American living in Germany who writes about it, and he, I believe, has it right. His name is Jack Newman. I will give you his. I'll send you his telephone number. You should let him talk to your listeners because he considers this challenge similar to Nazism. There's also on Mount Lincoln, where you are as well. There's Kolya Zhivago, a British writer, who just had a few weeks earlier, a few days ago. In fact, he had an article comparing Nazism with Islamism. So this is not religion; it's a deadly theory. Some parts of Quran, unfortunately, can be interpreted as Mein Kampf of Adolf Hitler, and those parts have to be studied. But let me ask you: can you at least discuss geography with your students? Can you
do
show them our
geography.
borders?
Yes, and I can do that. I can teach the history, but until I do what I need to do, which is probably which is going to end up being retire, which is in the next few years. But I'm working towards changing the whole concept of what we teach in this topic to make America safer. So the only advantage I have in making this go from a state change to a federal change is actually the fact that we have something evil in place called Common Core, and if there's a change in education, it's going to be done federally. I want to get to one thing before I let you go, which is you had some fascinating information about a woman named Madeleine Albright. You had some great experiences, so I was wondering if you would share with our listeners about that.
Well, I was going to leave it for my memoirs, Lenny and I working, which is titled "Are You Making a Revolution Here?" But it deals with Nazism, communism, my personal experience, But also, I have had the opportunity to get to know some prominent people. As you know, I don't want to brag, but it is fact that that I have worked closely for a year and a half with Professor Joseph Korbel of Denver University, who was my mentor and advisor, distinguished historian, former ambassador to Yugoslavia, who happened to be her father. And I found out, of course, while we were working together, he was not very outspoken about it, but he told me, we are Jewish. And I said, does Madeleine know it? He said, yes. And this similar dissertation is explored, in fact, in the book by Mr. Dobb of Washington Post, where he says that she has been lying for a few decades about it. And I didn't, because she said, I knew her, and she's a daughter of my late friend. I didn't want to attack her, but when she came with this support for anti-Trump, anti-Islamist policy of
Those
suggesting
pro-Islamists.
that she would become a Muslim,
Yes.
I know that she changed her religion 3 or 4 times. She was hiding she was Jewish, revealed it only when it was not harmful to her. I could not help, and I had to go to the public and just mention it. I wrote a blog, if you recall. If Joseph Corbett was alive, her father, he would be with us, with you, me, and
Yes.
Trump and his supporters, because she is, as you can see in the Congress, if you go back to the first question, this tremendous division, and she's one of the leaders of our Democratic Party opposition against Trump. She with the CIA former deputy Morrell, I wrote about him for National Interest, are attacking him as a Russian agent. We are really at very extreme times in our country. Some people even worry about civil war. But we have so far been able to avoid the extremes of civil wars in our countries. We have a democratic system which has survived a few centuries. But, you have to be extremely careful, because if you watch the proceedings of U.S. Congress and the divisions between those parties, I go to what I said at the opening, you have, for the first time since Civil War, a deadly power struggle affecting our ability to cope with our enemies. And I worry about it very much.
Well, we're nearing near the time. I have a lot and what I just want to make sure that everybody knows where to follow you. So I was wondering if you could, and how to get a hold of your books. You're a published writer and author.
I have about 7, 8 books I've written and edited. I wrote a book about Soviet intervention in Czechoslovakia with the preface by the late Czech leader who was almost killed by the Russians, Alexander Dubček. I wrote a book about conflict in Nicaragua, about Gorbachev new thinking. It is listed in Amazon and Google. I don't want to be this list of promotion, but I must say one thing which you and I know is we do with my wife Lenny. We do write at jvlv.net. jvlv.net. We're developing the site for other people, looking at the interventionist designs of Russia and as well as terrorism. And you can go there. We also write blogs, regular blogs every week for the New York Distinguished Organization Council of Relations wall, but it is just for the members, about 4,500 prominent Americans. But we also have the same blog published every week without censorship at the Russian International Affairs Council. That's the Institute of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, and they don't censor me at all. I sometimes make fun of Putin, and nothing has happened. They never censor us. And we, of course, do the same blog for LinkedIn on the jvlv.net, and we are at Twitter. But I don't want to end up with some promotion. I just want people to to listen to teachers like you, and I hope that you will be able to give them more about the history and the present struggle.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I hope to have you come back someday soon. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Delighted, and I will give you Jack Newman, and maybe next time you can also interview my wife because she's more interesting. She speaks with flawless Brooklyn accent.
Well, we'll have you both on next time then.
Okay, wonderful.
That. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Dr. Jiri Valenta is a man where I don't always agree with him, but I'll tell you, it's refreshing to hear someone who has an admitted Democrat background and comes out and says, hey, something's wrong here. And he does it from a historical point of view. And that is extremely, extremely important. There's an awful lot of crazy news happening this week, people. Crazy news. I can't even get into all the insanity. This Islamophobia law that may be going into place in Canada. I'm concerned. They will not define Islamophobia. However, they want to make it illegal. So I fear for my friend Cal, who lives in Toronto area. I've actually visited her, And to think that you could be arrested because someone thinks you have a phobia. But wait a minute. Let's get down to what Islamophobia is really about. It's about shutting people up. So if you can make a claim, you can have somebody arrested. It doesn't have to be based in fact. And why do I say that? Well, let's see. Some of the last claims by Muslims about being persecuted. Let's see. We had one where this lady said someone attacked her because she had a hijab on. What did we learn? She made the whole thing up. So she blamed people. So is this going to be the constant occurrence? You can arrest people that just aren't Muslim? That's what this basically says. This is a law that allows you to arrest non-Muslims. That's all it is. It is a backup of Sharia. It is, yes, Doc. It is Doc DLB. It is thought police. This is the reason why I personally consider hate crime a thought crime. I have a problem when they start to arrest you for your thoughts. We have been arresting people for actions that have been committed, not actions that have been thought out. We have different levels of crime based on how you think, but this is a severe problem. And I think I'll leave that one to Cal because it's going to be incredibly personal to her. And I think other people should probably stick in with her show this week coming up. Gary's posting the thing, M103, and it's on Rebel Media, the blasphemy law. Now, yes, if this goes into law next week, I believe Cal will have a couple other Canadians in her room with her, on the show with her, who will actually address this. This law is dangerous because, first of all, it's next door. For me, it's truly next door because I could, take a boat across the lake and I'd be there. I have friends that will be arrested over there, and I say arrested because it is a sad, sad truth that they would be. It's scary to think about some of the things that are actually happening. I have a friend over there named Ron Banerjee. He's Hindu, and he stands out on the streets and exposes a lot of what Islam really teaches, and he's been attacked because of that. Today he gave me a very important note, and if you live in or around Toronto area, there is I'm just going to pull this up again. It is there's an Islamophobia convention, and of course, they think only Muslims will show up, or people stupid enough to believe in this concept. It's being promoted on Facebook. I'm going to put the link in the room. It's February 17th. It's called DEFY M103, Celebrate Islamophobia, Eric Brazau's hate speech hearing. So February 17th to February 18th. The address for this meeting is 361 University Avenue, Toronto, Ontario. The code for the area is M5G1Y1 in Canada. If you have the chance to attend this, to see this, to film it, actually we should say video these days, please do, and please share it with the world. Again, I'm going to put the link in the chat room. It is off a Facebook page. So please, if you can, take a look at this. If you can get an audio tape, if you can just audio, or you can video it, please do. I do know people who would be highly interested in this, and if you're able to share that with any one of us on Global Patriot Radio or American Patriot Radio, please let us know. We will do our best to give you kudos for being the person who stands in the gap and gets this information out. There's a couple of incredible news stories out there. Like I said, there's just so many this week. And the sad, sorry truth is that in this respect, Islam is the gift that keeps on giving, and I simply wish it would stop. So just to pull an interesting story out there, going backwards a little bit towards we were talking about Russia. And I'm pulling this story off the Russia Insider. And I don't normally read stories about anything that has to do, and that does not necessarily have to do with civilization jihad, but I thought this would be fitting. It says by Ricky Twisdale. The story is titled "Enough. It is time to lock up John McCain and Lindsey Graham." The two U.S. senators' latest attempt to set off World War III during their visit to the Ukraine is the last straw. Something must be done. In the past few days, renewed heavy fighting has broken out in Ukraine's Donbass region between government troops and allied militias, though they are supposed to be nationalized and the separatists. Naturally, both sides claim the other started it, but it does not take a genius to see who has something to gain from renewed hostilities and who has nothing at all to gain. Russian Vladimir Putin derived no benefit from an armed conflict on Russia's border, one which Russia is being blamed and punished for by Europe and the United States. Again, take it that this is printed in Russian, so listen to the source. And it was Moscow who forced the separatists to the table at Minsk. Just when they had the upper hand on the battlefield following Kiev's massive defeat in the Debaltsevo pocket. Now, with the coming to power of Donald Trump as President of the United States, the Pushists in Kiev have lost their principal sponsor. Trump has made clear his intentions to prioritize relations with Russia, and European statesmen, such as leading French presidential candidate François Fillon, have begun to echo him. Germany is losing enthusiasm for this headache. The Ukrainian government is about to find itself isolated with no friend either to the east or to the west. Enter the malevolent minions of mischief, U.S. Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham. Again, I'm reading from this document, so please. The dastardly duo made a trip to the Donbass front line just after the New Year, where they gave incendiary speeches egging on Ukrainian troops to restart hostilities. There is actually video of the speeches on this site, which I'm going to post in the room. Unbelievably, Graham sought to directly instigate a new attack, speaking these words: "Your fight is on our fight. 2017 will be the year of offense. All of us will go back to Washington, and we will push the case against Russia. Enough of a Russian aggression. It's time for them to pay a heavier price." John McCain was no less provocative. "I believe you will win. I am convinced you will win, and we will do everything we can to provide you with what we need what you need to win." Now, there's a problem with this, and this particular writer is intelligent enough to talk about what the real problem is. It's called the Logan Act. And he puts in the quote on the Logan Act. It says at 953, private correspondence with foreign governments, which basically says this: any citizen of the United States, wherever he may be, who without authority of the United States, direct or indirectly, commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof with intent to influence the measures or conduct of any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof in relation to any disputes, controversies with the United States, or to defeat the measures of the U.S., shall be fined under this title or imprisoned 3 years or both. So, according to this law, the Logan Act, they should simply arrest Lindsey Graham and John McCain. You know, I have to agree with the concept of arresting people for doing something they have no business doing and making life more difficult. Now, again, I said I was posting the link in the chat room, and I just did. I do want to thank those who are listening that we can see in the chat room. We are missing Cal, as everybody seems to notice. Bigfoot, Bob Evers, Doc, DLB, Gary Comfort, Golf Dogs, and thank you for joining us. I hope your husband's doing better still. God bless you all for listening. I do want to get into the next story because I have, again, unfortunately, too many tonight. So this one comes out of Sweden. And this is a story I want everyone to pay close attention to. Having been in Sweden, I was there and I saw some of this stuff firsthand. So when I say I saw some of this stuff firsthand and you start meeting people who say these things, you have to listen. And this is by Gatestone Institute. It's gatestone.eu. The ball starts rolling. This article is entitled "Second Swedish Cop Opens Up About Migrants Destroying His Country." This was posted February 7th by Vincent van den Bon. Blow the lid off the cesspool that hides beneath Sweden's political correctness. The quote is, "I'm so effing tired. What am I writing? What I'm writing here isn't politically correct, but I don't care. Our pensioners are on their knees. The schools are a mess. Healthcare is an inferno. The police is completely destroyed. Everyone knows why, but none dares or wants to say why." In response, Swedish newspapers, again, Swedish newspapers owned by the government, have published on the issue, and a Facebook page called Stand Up Peter Springer has gathered the support of over 85,000 people from all over the world. One of the many people leaving a message of support is fellow policeman Thomas Assenlaff. He said, "I have worked in the field for more than 43 years. I share Peter's infectious question for 100%. Our managers do not dare to take up a position in any direction. As you can see, there is no senior manager who has dared to give Peter backing. Instead, they introduced Code 291, which is meant to keep a lid on immigrant-related crimes. Just look at the photo ban. It is appalling that this is happening in today's Sweden. To top it all off, the chief of police has completely authority over the police. Instead of supporting his people, he will order them to be transferred if they do not dance to his tune. The Swedish public should be all told of the facts now. Understand, young officers do not dare to speak out, criticize the police leadership, or openly support Peter, because that would be the end of their career. Because when they would seek a transfer, they'd be known as unloyal. As I am close to retirement, I can be critical to my heart's content. I have previously been called in by my superiors for my opinions. I have stated on this medium, Facebook, now I believe the ball has been made to roll. And maybe we can get our leadership to open their eyes and no longer deny the truth. Live strong. Thomas Assenlaff, Greater Gothenburg Bicycle Police. Code 291, Assenlaff mentions, is a special refugee code used when the police are called for anything related to, again, they're calling these refugees. Swedish newspaper Svenska Dagbladet has an article on the topic which reveals that Code R291 has been used since October 2016 to effectively hide 5,000 incidents, ranging from illness persons to cases of assault, rape, and death. And what is most shocking is that all these cases were deliberately kept secret. It says the National Operational Department, NOA, of the Swedish police wrote in a document this newspaper knows that each and every notification which the victim, the suspect, or anyone questioned is a migrant must be labeled with a specific code 291, and then it has to be done to crimes or events linked to buildings or places where refugees are received. Things are bad in Sweden. So bad, nobody is allowed to know. When the people in Sweden threaten the people who govern them because they speak out and share the truth, publishing these things are the government newspaper who are publishing the threats. There's things happening in Sweden partly because when you say you are Syrian, you are given citizenship. That's all they have to do. They don't even have to prove they're from Syria. They can look yellow, they can look black, red, purple, green. You walk up there and you say, I'm from Syria, Sweden automatically gives them Swedish citizenship. There is no required proof, and they ask no questions. This is Sweden today. It's scary. It's somewhat like Canada in the respect that the Canadians are not asking enough questions if they ask before they take persons into their country as refugees. This is part of the problem of having a man named Justin Trudeau who is a Muslim leading their country. Now, this story came out again this week, and I want to go over it. This is by the Daily Caller. House Intelligence Foreign Affairs Committee members compromised by rogue IT staff. I believe I mentioned some of this last week, or maybe it's just that I've been reading this story, it feels like over and over again. So I thought I'd share it. This is posted by Luke Rosiak. Three brothers who managed office information technology for members of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and other lawmakers were abruptly relieved of their duties on suspicions that they accessed congressional computers without permission. Listen to the brothers' names. Abid, Imran, and Jamal Awan were barred from computer networks at the House of Representatives Thursday. The Daily Caller News Foundation investigative group has learned 3 members of the intelligence panel and 5 members of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs were among the dozens of members who employed the suspects on a shared basis. The 2 committees deal with many of the nation's most sensitive issues and documents, including those related to the war on terrorism. Also among those whose computer systems may have been compromised, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the Florida Democrat who has previously been the target of disastrous email hack. Ooh, be where this comes from? When she served as chairman of the DNC. The brothers are suspected of serious violations, including accessing members' computer networks without their knowledge and stealing equipment from Congress. Jamal handled IT for Representative Joaquin Castro, a Texas Democrat who serves on the Intelligence and Foreign Affairs panels. As of February 2nd, his employment with our office has been terminated, Castro said. Now, interesting note they mention is that these people have to be fired by each individual thing, so because they're hired by each individual group. Whoa, that's a lot of paperwork. So Imran worked for Representative, now this will surprise you or shouldn't, Andre Carson, Indiana Democrat Muslim, and Jackie Spear, a California Democrat. Both are members of the Intelligence Committee. How did Andre Carson get on an intelligence committee when he backs the Muslim Brotherhood? Something is wrong. People can't be too intelligent when you put somebody who is against your country into a position of power like that. These are the things that just make me scream and yell. Wake up! The 3 men are shared employees. Again, then it goes on about how they have to be fired by each individual one. It does say the BuzzFeed reported that the sergeant at arms told the staff the subjects were the 4 men who were brothers and 1 woman. It didn't name them, blah, blah, blah. It quoted the affected member as saying that it said some sort of procurement scam, but now it's concerned that they may have stolen data, emails, God knows what else. Wait, so doesn't this kind of confirm what I've been saying and what this network, Global Patriot Radio and American Patriot Radio, is telling people? There is something called civilization jihad going on. It is infiltration into our government by the enemy. And isn't that what we just saw? Thank you, Barry Obama. Okay. Another article. This one is by the Middle East Forum. It's a reprint of an article that was pretty much in the Wall Street Journal, but it's a very, very important thing. Sorry, not a reprint. It wasn't in. This is not a reprint. I'm sorry. Let me just read this part. Again, it's by Cynthia Farahat. Listen to this title very closely. Not blacklisting Muslim Brotherhood carries risk. In a January 26 Wall Street Journal article titled "Blacklisting Muslim Brotherhood Carries Risk," Yaroslav Trofimov writes that the Trump administration's proposal designation of the terrorist group could trigger a slew of unexpected consequences. What, are they going to hurt us? What, they're supposed to be? Didn't Barack Obama say they're nonviolent? So unexpected consequences from a nonviolent people? Oh, are they going to prove my point that they are not? They are a violent people? It sounds like that. Due to its millions of supporters. Oh. He then further defends the group by quoting supporters who proudly testify to its nonviolence. Oh, wait, you're going to give us consequences, but you're nonviolent? Both claims that the Brotherhood is popular and nonviolent are deeply misleading. It is true. The current card-carrying members of the Brotherhood do not openly support violence and condone terrorism. That's crap. I'm sorry. They will tell people that, but that's not exactly true. But they certainly do openly. So here we go. Here they say it. In the article it says it. But they certainly do openly support terrorism and violence when speaking in Arabic. The Brotherhood went as far as declaring that it will establish a war committee following the 2013 ouster of Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi, a member of the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood's television stations have not only attacked current Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, they have called for his assassination. Some group of nonviolent people, huh? In 2015, the Muslim Brotherhood channel also threatened mass terrorist attacks in Egypt and vowed to target foreigners in Egypt and their embassies. The official public-facing Brotherhood institutes are designed to win political power and their leaders, and spokespeople have learned to play the game well. But nearly every Sunni Islamist terror group in history was established fully or in part by leaders associated with the Brotherhood. Another name for that is the Ikhwan. In 1985, three Muslim Brother leaders, Abdullah Azzam, and then Osama bin Laden, and Ayman Zawahiri, founded MAK, which is Maktab al-Khidmat in Pakistan, which later became Al-Qaeda. In 2014, in a 2014 interview, Brotherhood spiritual leader Yusuf al-Qaradawi admitted that the Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was indeed a former member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Meanwhile, Qaradawi and others associated with the Brotherhood issued fatwas legitimizing suicide bombings. Rex Tillerson, President Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, rightly lumped the Brotherhood alongside jihadist groups in his Senate's confirmation hearing, saying, "The demise of ISIS will also allow us to increase our attention on other agents of radical Islam, like Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, and certain elements within Iran." So, Tillerson, you just got my vote for saying that comment. Okay. Mr. Trofimov notes that Brotherhood and its affiliates were winning elections in the wake of Arab Spring, but this was hardly across the Middle East, as he claims. The Brotherhood's most celebrated triumph, the election of Morsi as president of Egypt, was short-lived, precipitating the largest anti-terrorism protests in Middle East history. Islamists are great at whipping passions against this or that government, but even Muslims panic when Islamists are. Enough about the nonviolence and peacefulness of the Muslim Brotherhood. Mr. Trofimov, given the Brotherhood's ties to the vast majority of Sunni terrorist organizations in the world today, not blacklisting it, the Muslim Brotherhood, is what's really risky. Amen to that. Thank you, Cynthia Farahat. Excellent article, and I did not expect the Middle East Forum to put that up, but I'll tell you, that is high praise. That is an excellent article. And I never want to miss the Express, because they always have surprises. The Express, right out of the UK, this particular news source almost daily has something going on showing things that Muslims are doing in Europe that just boggle the mind. This one gets me. It's titled Picture. Allah shouting Muslim disturbs funeral ceremony in church. A Muslim man disturbed a funeral service in a church when he suddenly started to shout out Allah during a sermon, saying he wanted to share his message with the infidels. The 33-year-old Muslim man, whose name has not been made public, suddenly went into the church in the town of Schnachten in Germany. He said he is said to have gone into the church saying, "I am come in the name of the prophet to proclaim the message of Allah to the infidels." The incident happened on Wednesday and was only later made public by Pastor Wilfred Romashear. The man had initially entered the church and tried to make himself heard during the morning speech, and later read out loud some Arabic verses, according to Pastor. Pastor Romashear said he first tried to reason with the man by offering to have a conversation after the service. The Muslim man, who is said to have only moved to the place recently, then sat down on one of the rear church benches from where he started to recite verses in Arabic. Romashear said, "I suspect those were verses from the Quran." The man finally left the church after the priest asked an employee of the burial company to call the police. "Ooh, run away when we find the truth." He said the man has not used physical violence. There was no tussle in a morning service in which people were taking leave of a loved one, such as a disturbance or a devastating situation. What would you do, people? This happened during a funeral service you attended. What was the original purpose for this? Is he scoping out the church for possible attacks like they did in France? These are things that are scary. Some truths are hard to swallow, and the fact that they could be checking out a church for a possible attack, unfortunate, could be a very truthful thing. There's two other articles I want to get into. I don't know if I'm going to have all the time in the world to get to them. This one, the French Inquisition. Now, the French Inquisition, France's new Dreyfus trial, a jihad against the truth, by Yves Mamou, Gatestone. An important red line in France has just been crossed in true Dhimmi fashion. In a move reminiscent of both the Inquisition and the Dreyfus trial, all of France's so-called anti-racist organizations have joined a jihad against free speech and against truth. On January 25, 2017, France's anti-racist organizations, all of them, even the Jewish LICRA, International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, joined the Islamist CCIF, the Collective Against Islamophobia, in court against Georges Benassin, a highly regarded Jewish historian of Moroccan extraction and an expert on the history of Jews in Arab countries. Not only did the Islamist CCIF and the Jewish LICRA unite against him, but also the French Human Rights League, SOS Racism, and the Movement Against Racism for Friendship with People. Bensoussan is being prosecuted for remarks he made during a France culture radio debate about anti-Semitism among French Arabs. He said this: "An Algerian sociologist, Smaim Lacher, with great courage, just said in a documentary aired on Channel 3, it is a shame to deny this taboo. Namely that in the Arab families in France, and everyone knows it, but nobody wants to say it, anti-Semitism is sucked with mother's milk." The documentary that Bensoussan was referring to was called Teachers in the Lost Territories of the Republic and was aired in October 2015 on Channel 3. In this documentary, Lasher, professor of Algerian origin, said anti-Semitism is already awash in the domestic space. It rolls almost naturally off the tongue, awash in the language. It is an insult when parents shout at their children when they want to reprimand them and they call them Jews. Yet all Arab families know this. It is a monumental hypocrisy not to see that this anti-Semitism begins as a domestic one. No complaint was filed against Lasher, but as soon as Benassin, in the heat of radio debate, referred to the Arab Semitism as sucked with mother's milk, CCIF followed by an anti-racist associations. They brought him to opposed justice. Their accusation was simple. Mother's milk is not a metaphor for cultural anti-Semitism transmitted through education. but a genetic and essentialist accusation. It means all Arabs are anti-Semitic. In other words, Benusin, the Benusin is a racist. Professor Smain Lasher of the University of Strasbourg denied the quote and told the website Mediapart, "I have never said nor written that kind of ignominy." He filed a complaint against Benusin, but later withdrew it. Judgment will be rendered March 7th. So let's pay attention and watch this, people. We've got a few weeks left to watch this. We know of a couple other people that are going through trials now that have to do with freedom of speech. This is a fight that is going on against freedom based on Sharia. That how dare you criticize a Muslim? This is scary, scary things. This next article, we'll see how far I get into it. It's called "The West's Real Bigotry: Rejecting Persecuted Christians." This is by Uze Bolot on February 5th, 2017. Finally, after years of apathy and inaction, Washington is extending a much-needed helping hand to Middle Eastern Christians. U.S. President Donald Trump recently announced that persecuted Christians will be given priority when it comes to applying for refugee status in the United States. Christians and Yazidis are being exposed to genocide at the hands of the Islamic State and other Islamist groups who have engaged in a massive campaign to enslave the remnant non-Muslim minorities and to destroy their cultural heritage. The scholar Hannibal Travis wrote in 2006, "Unfortunately, the West has rejected the idea of solidarity with the Christians of the Middle East. Diplomacy based on oil interests and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Thus, the United States, Britain, and France have largely ignored the persecutions of the Christians of Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, and Sudan, while rushing to save the oil-rich Muslim states of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, as well as besieged minority Kurds, Bosnians, Kosovars. To this day, American troops in Iraq reportedly do not always intervene against these persecution of Christians, perhaps not wanting to be seen as siding with the Christians and thus provoke retaliation. Then these so-called liberals in the West and even Christians start pushing back against the move. Insidious Christians in Iraq and Syria have not only been exposed to genocide at the hands of the Islamic State and other Islamist groups, but also their applications for immigration to Western countries have been put on the back burner by shamefully, but not surprisingly, the UN. A group of Armenians from Iraq, for example, have fled from their homes in Iraq after the Islamic State came, or ISIS, if you want to call them that. Instead, they have gone to Turkey. I'm not sure if they're any safer. The things that are coming out on Turkey these days are just as scary. People, we cannot allow Sharia to become our law. This is one of the reasons why we have to very, very carefully fight to make sure things against foreign laws and being used in our courts. We have to make sure laws pass on that to prevent stupid judges from using laws like this. We have to fight on. It's time to stand up and do something. It's time to stop just listening. Now, I say this every show. What are you going to do with what you learn? What are you going to do? It's time to stand up. It's time to fight back. Well, we have a president in office right now who understands that there is a problem with Islam. He calls it radical Islam. I'm simply calling it Islam. I'm going to agree with last week's host that maybe we shouldn't call it radical Islam. Maybe we could just call it Islam. Maybe we shouldn't call it devout Islam. Maybe we should just call it Islam. I have met people who call themselves Muslim who do not practice Islam. And I would prefer not for people who, you can call yourself Muslim, but if you don't practice that, I have a hard time considering you a Muslim, even though you say you are. So people, let's get the truth on this. It is Islam that is the danger here. Not many people are going to come out and say it. They're going to say they see these people here in these countries and they do or do not act dangerously. The truth of the matter is, are they practicing Islam? Well, they call themselves Islamic or Muslim. And the truth is they do not. This is one of the things I think that has to change in America. If we actually understand what Islam really teaches, we can protect us. We can protect. Here we go, people. Ev, thank you for joining us. Listen in to our shows. I'm sorry, running out of time. So please do listen tomorrow night to Gadi Edelman, and on Friday to Carl, the Dr. Carl, with his show on the logic of Islam. Saturday we have Usama Dakdak. Sunday we have Damon Rosen's Insane Sunday. Monday we have Vito and Al. Please listen in. God bless.